Hello folks, Luke's looking out for you, and this is Predictive Maintenance in under 8 minutes. Firstly, we can't talk about fixing things or predicting if things are going to break without talking about how they break. Normally, when an item breaks, or more specifically, it reaches a failure state, which essentially means it no longer functions how we designed it to, it typically does so via what we call a failure pattern, which is how it reached that failure state. And we can take these failure patterns into two major categories: age-related failure patterns and non-age related failure patterns. Age-related failure patterns typically apply to simple items like light bulbs or for things with directly measurable wear, tear, evaporation, or corrosion. This can apply to things like the electrolyte inside of a rechargeable battery or the corrosion on element rods inside of water heaters. Now, it can also apply to complex items, but there is usually a dominant way in which they fail, also known as a failure mode. A good example of this is lead-acid car batteries that routinely fail due to sulfate crystal buildup. But there are lots of different failure modes. For these types of failure patterns, scheduled restoration and scheduled discard and replacement are the most effective forms of maintenance, but how we determine which of these to use is for a whole other session entirely. However, 89% of failure patterns tend to be non-age related, which is a fancy way of saying they're random. And this is due to the complexity of modern equipment. This makes them very hard to plan for, as there's no average time until they fail. And so calendar or cycle maintenance activities for these types of failure patterns are just considered a waste of time. So this is where we enter a proactive style of maintenance called condition-based maintenance, or CBM. CBM is a tactic that seeks to analyze the current state or condition of an item or system to ascertain whether or not it is close to failure and if it needs to be restored or replaced. Because although we said the majority of items have non-age related failure patterns, they can still sometimes give us signs of when they are wearing out. And CBM uses condition monitoring activities to discover these signs of wear out. And these activities can include collecting key data on deterioration characteristics of the system, reports from operators about anomalies when using the item, including reduced performance, and intrusive examination, usually triggered by conditions like if there's a new noise, or something's heating up when it definitely shouldn't be, or something begins to smoke, and so on and so forth. And so now, 2.5 minutes into the video, we get into predictive maintenance. Thank you for waiting. So, what is it? Well, predictive maintenance is the next evolution in CBM, although they can and do work hand in hand. You see, predictive maintenance is a data-driven form of maintenance that seeks to use data-rich analysis tools to predict the overall life of an asset, allowing us to better estimate when failures will occur. You see, the life of an asset can be roughly broken down into 4 sections, beginning with intended life, where the system is essentially healthy; degraded life, where performance may begin to decline; critical life, where the system is moving towards failure and its performance may be waning and show some obvious signs of wear out. And we typically don't want to operate the asset within this portion of its life, as it could be unpredictable, especially for safety critical assets, or before it reaches a functional failure. The issue is, for assets with non-age related failure patterns, we don't know how long each of these sections will be. Therefore, we have to use maintenance tactics to get the most out of our asset, or what we call the remaining useful life, or RUL. CBM can use condition monitoring to discover detectable signs of wear out during the degraded part of the life cycle, but it can't tell us how long that part of its life is going to last. Whereas predictive maintenance enriches the data collected from condition monitoring activities with other data layers such as performance, operational, and historical reports to allow us to understand the asset's position in our 4 stages of life and better predict when the asset will enter the critical stage of life, thus pushing the boundary of how much remaining useful life we can exploit. It also provides us with ways to simulate different RULs by changing the performance and operation parameters. So why is this useful? Well, because we now have a longer RUL, we can plan our maintenance activities more efficiently and effectively, saving us both time and money. But it also helps us to reduce unnecessary downtime, which is the amount of time systems can't be used for. And more importantly, if an item is safety critical, like an aircraft's engine, well, then we can improve safety because we now know more accurately when failures are likely to occur, which I hope you'll agree is a pretty important factor. Let's put this into an example of a maintenance activity that should be familiar to most of you at home so we can better understand the differences between CBM and predictive maintenance. Let's consider the act of refueling a car as our maintenance activity, which it absolutely is. It's a replenish activity, because if you didn't restore it, the car would stop. When you look at your dashboard and see how much fuel you have left and begin questioning if you should refuel or not, you are deciding whether or not to perform a condition-based maintenance activity. Because you know how much fuel is in the tank from the fuel level sensor data, i.e. the condition. The thing is, this information only tells us how much fuel we have left. It doesn't tell us how far we'll get, or take in the habits of whoever's driving, or what the characteristics of this particular vehicle are, or anything else for that matter. And so you now have to make a judgment call on how long you think you could drive before you need to refuel. And you don't want to leave it too long, as you could end up in the middle of nowhere with no fuel and no fuel station in sight. So if you are unsure of your car's miles per gallon, you may be forced to keep filling up just in case, until of course you build up some of your own historical data. However, some modern cars can collect data on how you drive, including your speed, gear selection, RPM, fuel consumption, and a bunch of other factors in order to calculate your miles per gallon accurately. And by combining this data with the condition monitoring data, i.e. how much fuel you have left, they can predict how many miles you have left before you run out of fuel. Some cars will even tell you if there are fuel stations at the optimum point in your route. This is an example of predictive maintenance, where the point of failure is calculated ahead of time to help us better plan our maintenance activities now. And we can take this even further. By collecting data on specific routes, drivers, and vehicle characteristics, we can almost predict the optimum time to refuel for any given combination, which you've got to admit, is pretty cool, eh? And predictive maintenance is even more important for those components that we can't see. For example, a timing belt, which we are told by manufacturers to change based on miles driven. But this doesn't consider all of the variable factors we discussed earlier, like driver behavior. So we could be doing a discard maintenance activity far too early. Or if the car's being driven hard all the time, then not nearly enough. We could increase our condition monitoring activities and check on the belt more often, but we're trying to reduce the number of maintenance hours, not increase them. And besides, invasive maintenance activity can introduce stress to otherwise healthy systems and cause unwanted failures. So predictive maintenance for this component might be the answer to us optimizing our maintenance activities. This is what predictive maintenance is for. It not only allows us to predict failure ahead of time, but by correlating the right data, we can make virtual copies of items and systems called a digital twin, which can help us to maintain systems that would be hard to observe within complex units in real time. Which, as a side note, is really useful for helping to design new systems or for simulating environments or operating conditions, something that F1 does for literally every circuit, driver, and weather condition. And there you have it. That's predictive maintenance in under 8 minutes. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to learn more about predictive maintenance, feel free to reach out to us. But until then, from me and my digital twin, remember that Luke's looking out for you. Catch you next one.